Post-traumatic growth is a phrase often used when discussing military veterans' experiences, right? Do you believe adversity makes people stronger, or does it just expose who they really are, who they truly are?
I believe, this is another great question, but I believe adversity makes us stronger. And if we let it, adversity is not just a test, it could be a teacher. You know, and I think that's really important. And also, you know, adversity, if we let it, it can define us instead of refine us, you know, and I think it's how we respond to that adversity. But I'm a believer that adversity is what makes us stronger. Like, we need to go through some of those trials and tribulations like we just talked about with me being a young sergeant and kind of getting hit in the face for the first time and getting a feel for what failure feels like.
Unfinished business, I've got more to give. I'm not done yet, this life persists. This is my story, my unfinished business.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Unfinished Business, a podcast for veterans pursuing new life missions. Some missions don't end when the war is over. Some battles begin when the uniform comes off. Today's guest is Darrell Utt, former Green Beret, combat leader, and the mind behind Grit to Glory, a Green Beret's journey from West Virginia to the streets of Baghdad. He's led men into war zones where failure wasn't an option. But his toughest mission, rebuilding life after service. Today we'll talk about the mindset, the mission, and the truth about life after the military, because it isn't about looking back, it's about what's ahead. So let's get into it. Darrell, thank you very much for being Unfinished Business Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
For veterans pursuing new life missions. You know, I got to tell you, man, I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I want to touch on this before we start with some of the questions on here. But I was listening to your story about your upbringing, and it really resonated with me. Off the camera, I was talking about how, man, we had a similar background. I want you to just talk about this, touch on that just a little bit, because I have a feeling. I'll ask you a question after you go through it.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Huntington, West Virginia, little small town, and grew up playing all the sports, but I did come from a tough upbringing. My mom was abusive, and I think there's reasons for that. I'm not trying to make excuses, but she had a rough childhood. She had a rough marriage. She had a rough job dealing with mental health patients. So I think she took that out on us kids. You know, I was the baby. I had an older brother and an older sister, and we kind of took the brunt of that. So yeah, had a rough upbringing, and then at some point, I think probably right around 10 years old is when my dad took over a little bit more. When I started getting involved in sports, or started getting a little bit better at sports, so he kind of took over at around 10 years old, and we started doing baseball, basketball, football, all those things, hunting, fishing, trapping, but definitely had a rough upbringing.
Yeah, you know, I was wondering, like, you know, we see a lot of individuals, young men and women for that matter, that go enlist in the military, right? How much of them do you think are, you know, part of it is like, I want to be, you know, I want to join the, you know, Marine Corps, I want to join the Army, I want to be this grunt, I want to be this, and how much of it do you believe is part of it's like, man, my environment, like I got to figure out a way to find a way for myself. I need the structure, I need the purpose, I need the mission. How much do you think that plays a role, as opposed to, you know, saying, hey, I'm coming in this to like serve my country and, you know,
yeah,
shot at.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think for me anyway, the patriotism and the love of country, like I had that, but that developed and evolved over time. Like I really had that later on in my career, that love of country and my teammates and all of those things. But I think initially, you know, going back, it was the environment and opportunities. I didn't have a lot of opportunities in West Virginia at that time. So I do think that was a big contributor, was the environment and the lack of opportunities. You know, I come from humble beginnings, so college wasn't a thing for me. So yeah.
Yeah, so you probably, it's so cute. When you meet other veterans, you want to know why did they join? Why did they enlist, right? You want to see what were they trying to get out of family trauma and family life, and saying, I need to find a father figure and that kind of thing. Because that was part of the reason I enlisted is the same, it's kind of similar. It's like my upbringing was similar to yours. So I was like, man, I want to get this question down, because I really want to try to figure out where what holes are we missing when we talk to veterans, and and when we talk to people that are coming in the service. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
In your book, Grit to Glory, it lays out a roadmap for resilience. But let's start with something a little bit more, like get into it. You've seen combat, you've led men into war, and you've had to find your footing once the chapter closed. Looking back, what moment tested your resolve the most, not just in the battle, but in life?
Yeah, I would say for that one, being a single dad. That was tough for me because, I had 10 years operational where I was on a special forces team. And right toward the end of my 10 years, I got custody of my son. He was 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I was the active duty Green Beret that just came back from Iraq, my 4th trip to Iraq.
Oh, wow.
So now all of a sudden, I have custody of my son. And it was great, but at the same time, it was a little bit devastating to me too, because even though my wife and I had separated, my son and daughter remained together. So that was like the one thing that had remained, was they were always together. And now all of a sudden, I have my son and I'm out in Colorado, and my daughter is with my ex-wife in West Virginia.
Oh, wow.
So that was really tough for me. So we did all the paperwork. We made it all legal for me to get custody of my son. And then I PCS, permanent change of station. I moved from Fort Carson, Colorado to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was an instructor. So I was trying to navigate, how do I put my son and daughter back together? And, before I did that move, my lawyer was like, it's going to be really tough for you to get custody of your daughter while you're an active duty Green Beret. Maybe if you're an instructor role or staff, maybe you'll have a chance. So trying to navigate that situation. And then I ultimately did get custody of my daughter.
Oh, wow.
So I had custody of my son, I had custody of my daughter, and I'm so thankful, so grateful that the military allowed me to continue working, continue to be in the military, and still be a single dad. But that was a whole nother new set of challenges that I wasn't really prepared for, and I didn't realize how tough that was. And actually, one of my social media posts today I did on LinkedIn was like, my toughest job, not a Green Beret, not as the Chief of Operations at the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation, but being a single dad. That was tough, man. That was a tough transition.
Wow, especially in that kind of in that moment in your life, you're in this action-oriented moment in your life. You're like actions, more actions, and it's very. I think that's surreal to hear that kind of avenue. You wonder how children take the transition from going to their regular life, and then they go into a military life. How was that transition for your children, if you care to speak on that?
Yeah, it was tough for me because I was operating at a very high level. I was a Master Sergeant E8, so I was at the high end of the rank structure, and I was looking to make that next rank, to make E9, to make Sergeant Major. I had a great career. I had great deployments. And then when I got custody of my son, inside I had that kind of sinking feeling. Even though I was happy, I was excited to have custody of my son, I had that sinking feeling that my career probably just ended. As far as, in special forces, it's going to be hard for me to be an E9, to be a sergeant major, and to continue to lead men into combat when I'm a single dad, just with my son. And then when I got my daughter, I knew my career is over as far as wanting to continue to progress and all of those things. So that was a tough transition that I was I was trying to deal with that, like basically losing my military career, but gaining something really, really important and being a dad. So it was just a tough struggle, man. That was tough. It was a tough struggle.
I'm sure you're looking back at it. It was like I'm sure you look at it back at it now and go like, that was a beautiful battle to endure.
Yes.
Am I right? We talked about that.
Yes. Looking back, it's like, man, like what are you even talking about right now? Like that's not a hard decision. Like that's not a tough decision. But when you're in it, it's a little bit tough because I went from things that I knew I was comfortable with to being in the unknown and trying to like tackle the everyday life of a dad and trying to pick up my daughter from elementary school to get her to gymnastics while my son's trying to get to football practice in middle school, and I'm trying to balance all of those things. But looking back, it's like, thank God I did that.
Yeah.
Thank the good Lord that I did that because that's the most important thing that I've done is to make sure that I was the best dad that I could possibly be. And I'm so very proud of that. So very proud of being a good dad.
Dude, that's like insane because you did like that, and you probably intervened in some generational curse that was about to lay claim over your children's life too. So man, that's amazing. You talk about the grit code, the idea that grit is the foundation of success in war and life. Was there ever a moment where you felt like you lost it? A time where you questioned your own ability to keep going?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a tough one. I would go back to a very pivotal moment in my career, and I was a young sergeant, E5. I think I was probably 24, 25 years old. So probably maybe 23, 24. I was young. I was a young guy, didn't really have a lot of time in the military. And we were on a high visibility deployment. And I was still a regular Army guy. I was an infantry guy. This is before I went to Special Forces. So one of our big deployments was a 6-month peacekeeping mission in Sinai, Egypt. So, and actually this took place, my son was born July 1st, 1995. And then 3 weeks later, I deployed to Sinai, Egypt for 6 months. That's pretty tough, right?
Yeah.
But it was a high visibility for us because I don't know if you've ever done like a peacekeeping mission or anything like that, but for us it was like we had these duties and responsibilities, and we kind of had like lines that when people would come out and visit, it's like, hey, I'm the cook for the squad, and I make sure the squad has nutritious meals to eat. Like we had like a script.
Yeah.
Because they wanted us to be polished because a lot of politicians came out to visit and things like that. So it was a little bit of, it was stress and it was high visibility. And when we got over there, I was a team leader. I was a Sergeant E5, so I had, a team of guys. The squad leader that led the squad had an issue. He was a Desert Storm vet, and he had something wrong with him. I don't know if he'd breathed something in, but he had some kind of condition, and he had to, they got him out of there quickly, and I took over the squad as a team leader. So, and then the squad didn't perform that well initially, and they made some mistakes. We had a guy that burned his leg, that was burning trash and burning waste. He burned his leg, so that was kind of a major incident. We had to medevac him out. My fellow sergeant, team leader, wrecked the vehicle, didn't tell anybody about it. We had to find out later. So we had all these issues going on, and I'm a young E5 leading a squad for the first time, and I experienced failure. And man, it hit me in the face really hard, and I was down. And it was such a pivotal point in my career, because this is right around the time that I'm wanting to go to Special Forces assessment and selection to see if I have what it takes to be a Green Beret. And my confidence took a major hit when I got punched in the face. So, and then of course, leadership, we did have good leadership at the time, but I knew that I wasn't doing as well as the other squads, and I kind of had to fight my way out of that situation. But I would say probably for a few days, I was down. And it was tough. And it was like, man, I didn't ask for this situation. I was a team leader, and I was doing great, and now I'm the squad leader, and I'm responsible for everything the squad does or doesn't do. It was a huge thing for me at the time, and it took the air out of me. Took the air out of my wings for a few days, and luckily, had a great Command Sergeant Major, Mike Hall, who's a legend from the 75th Ranger Regiment. He had actually left Ranger Regiment and took over our battalion as the battalion CSM, and he gave me a pep talk. And he said, hey man, you got to keep fighting. Stay in the fight, stay after it, keep doing a good job, keep being a leader. You know, he kind of gave me that boost of confidence that I really needed at a critical time, pivotal point in my career. And I'll never forget Mike Hall for that. Just, you know, master leadership, master mentorship. But he kind of helped pick me back up, and then I stayed after it. But that was a time where, man, I felt defeated.
Wow, that's crazy. I could see that being 23 years old, 24, you're still dealing with some emotional maturity and
Yeah.
evolving spirit, evolving to the type of man that God wants for you to be, and just, how much do you think that breaking you down was probably a lesson that you probably needed to learn?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, looking back, yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. The military teaches you how to lead men into battle, civilian life. That's a whole different battlefield, right? I think we'd agree on that.
Oh, yeah.
What's the hardest leadership lesson you'd had to unlearn when you transitioned out of the military?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've been fortunate. I had a good transition. I've had. You probably didn't know this about me, but I had some. I've had some good jobs since I've transitioned. My first job post-military. I don't think you know this.
I think I know some about a Bible.
Okay, maybe you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was the director of security and the director of operations at the Museum of the Bible in Washington D.C. when they were building it, and then of course when it opened, and had a big part. I feel like I had a big part in that. We had a great team. But I quickly learned in that role that being direct, concise, candor, all that type of stuff may not resonate that well on the civilian side. I'm used to dealing with special forces guys for the most part. Yeah. And people that really want to be there, and it's easy to be direct and give that feedback, have that candor, all those things. And then I'm transitioning, and now I'm dealing with men and women from the Washington, D.C. area. And that directness, I had to learn very quickly that doesn't resonate as well. Like I needed to take a step back and to work on my communication and not be so direct. And still I'm going to get my message across, but it's just how I do it. Yeah. The directness and the candor definitely had to change that.
Okay, don't lie. How many people did you make cry?
Well, there were a few, and then in D.C. that's a tough area because if you do need to terminate someone, there's usually some kind of complaint. Yeah. It's easy in D.C. to go file some kind of complaint or lawsuit or things like that. So, yeah, it was definitely a learning process.
Bible Museum, man, I'm gonna have to see what that is, what that looks like. Is it pretty
it's a gorgeous,
inspiring?
Yeah, it's a gorgeous, 430,000 square foot museum.
Wow.
$550 million to put it all together. It's a couple blocks south of the nation's capital. It's a treasure. You should go check it out.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the missions when we go out there.
Yeah.
Post-traumatic growth is a phrase often used when discussing military veterans' experiences, right? Do you believe adversity makes people stronger, or does it just expose who they really are, who they truly are?
I believe, this is another great question, but I believe adversity makes us stronger. And if we let it, adversity is not just a test. It could be a teacher. And I think that's really important. And also, adversity, if we let it, it can define us instead of refine us, you know? And I think it's how we respond to that adversity. But I'm a believer that adversity is what makes us stronger. Like, we need to go through some of those trials and tribulations, like we just talked about with me being a young sergeant and kind of getting hit in the face for the first time, and getting a feel for what failure feels like. You know, little did I know that I was going to like rely on some of those lessons years and years later at the highest stakes, when combat and, you know, bullets are flying and people are trying to kill you, you know, and it was like, hey, this was a peacetime lesson. You know, you just kind of had a little bit of failure. Yeah. But at the time when I was young, it was magnified. But I think all of that adversity, it's a teacher, man. It's a great teacher if you let it.
If you let it, right? If you don't get out. You gotta
Not
get out.
just a test, it's a teacher.
You got to get out of your own way sometimes, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Many veterans struggle with purpose once their mission-driven military life ends. How do you redefine purpose when the mission you once lived for is no longer there?
Yeah, I think that we want to have impact. We want to have some kind of impact on others, and I think that's important to note. Is like, you know, if you look at it like chapters, you know, if you kind of take the 30,000 view from space, it's like, hey, it's chapters, and don't let, you know, a 5, 10, 15, 20 year career, you know, define your whole entire life. Like, you know, I think you should go out and seek, like, what's the next thing? What's something that I could do? What's a higher purpose where I'm helping other people and I'm still having an impact? I don't wear the uniform anymore, but I can still go out and help people. And I think that's a good thing about the book, Grit to Glory. You know, yes, I wanted to honor my teammates. I wanted to honor those in the military that served. Because every person that serves is so important. And I hear it all the time where it's like, hey, I wasn't a special forces guy, or I wasn't a ranger, or I was a mechanic. I only did like 2 years. And it's like, hey, you signed your name on the line, and you wrote a blank check with your life for your country. That takes courage, my man. Yeah. That's really important. So I just think, you know, trying to share lessons, whether you write a book or you take a new job or you're a school teacher, you know, try to find that next chapter and try to make some impact. Maybe you're going to be a politician. Maybe you're going to do something else, but always seek that next chapter. I think that's the important thing. And don't set back and, you know, it's like, oh man, the good old days are past. You know, it's like there's still a lot of life out there to live. And I think that's important for people to realize. Yeah.
Do you believe that sometimes people's purpose is greater than the uniform? Like,
yes, of course.
Like there's some out there that's greater than what you experience. Being able to honor themselves for being able to make that commitment and sacrifice. Because what they say, 1 year at war, it's 10 years of rehabilitation. They say that sometimes. Do you believe that? Like, it's like, hey, my purpose is not tied to a uniform. My purpose has something great. It's tied to something greater.
Yeah, I do.
Have you learned that about yourself as well?
Yes, I have. You know, because I was kind of alluding to it earlier. I've been lucky to work a few different jobs. Yeah. Museum of the Bible, security consultant, National Medal of Honor Museum. Now heavy on the book, promoting the book and doing book events and things like that. But there is that higher purpose, and you know, whether it's spending more time with your family or becoming closer to your God, and you know, doing things like that, I think there is a higher purpose. Just don't end it when you know you take your uniform off for the last time, because there's still missions. You know, you're just wearing a different uniform. Yeah, that's awesome, man. Okay, we're going to talk about this National Medal of Honor Museum, because you've mentioned it a couple of times. I've been always excited to know what, from you, you know, what that was about, what it is about. But the National Medal of Honor Museum, where you once served as the Chief of Operations, is dedicated to preserving the stories of our bravest. What does the idea of legacy mean to you? Yeah, so for legacy, at the National Medal of Honor, where we're honoring the legacy of our nation's, highest heroes for valor in combat, which, by the way, they're opening March 25th, 2025 in Arlington, Texas. So I know that they're getting ready for that, and they're going to be working hard, and they're going to have a great product. So I'm super excited for them for that. But for legacy, I think it goes back once again to impact. And I was talking to a former colleague and a former boss of mine in Colorado. We were at a celebration of life for another teammate that had passed, and we started talking about legacy. And we didn't really define it as legacy, but we were just kind of catching up. And he was proudly sharing with me, when he was a company sergeant major, all of his master sergeant, all the team sergeants, he was so proud that they had went on and they'd made E9 and they were company sergeant majors and they had these great careers. And I think he kind of got me thinking about legacy, because you always want to leave something better than the way that you found it. So when I look back at my legacy in Special Forces, I feel like we definitely laid it all on the line for our Special Forces regiment, for our country, for our brothers and sisters. We definitely laid it all on the line, and I had a lot of great people that worked for me, and they went on to having these great careers. So I feel that legacy part too. But I also feel like this book is going to help, kind of promote that legacy and share my experiences, because, the global war on terror is over now, for the most part, Iraq and Afghanistan. And we have to be able to tell these stories to the next generation, just like my generation and probably you grew up reading about Vietnam, Green Berets and LRRPs and the 101st. I fed off those stories as a young man. So I hope that this legacy, with my book, it continues. I also think about my family, my son and my daughter, when we were kind of talking about it earlier, where I pretty much laid it all on the line for them. And I'm so happy, so proud that legacy, my son and daughter, they both graduated from college. They both graduated from Appalachian State in North Carolina. And, my son's in the military now. He's serving. Oh, wow. My daughter's married. She's working, and, all these great things. So legacy is the family, is the work that you've done. It's where I come from. When I was doing my book launch event in West Virginia, in Huntington, I was doing interviews similar to this, and it's like, hey, I'm unapologetically a son of West Virginia, and that's a part of my legacy, is where I come from. I feel like I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot my roots, and that's important to me. That's important to my legacy.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk about your book. When did you, let's talk about Grit to Glory, Green Beret's journey from West Virginia to the streets of Baghdad. Let's talk about it. What inspired you to write the book? When did when was the real moment you said, man, okay, let's do this? Like, when was that driving force? Was there an incident that happened? Was there something that you said, I got to get this down on paper?
Yeah, so I like to joke. This is a joke for my Navy SEAL brothers out there that may be listening. But, stereotypically in the special operations community, it's like, hey, Navy SEALs are the ones that write the books and they do the movie deals and things like that. That's kind of like the stereotype. And I had nothing but love for my Navy SEAL brethren. But stereotypically, the Green Berets are known as the quiet professionals and all of those things. So I'd never thought about writing a book. It didn't even cross my mind. But when I took the job at the National Medal of Honor Museum back in February 2022 as the Chief of Operations, a part of my job was doing the grassroots marketing and getting the word out. Because when you're building something brand new, a lot of people don't know about it. And if it's something awesome that you want to share with people, you want to get the word out. Yeah. And, I was tasked to do some of the lower level, all still important, but some of the lower level speaking engagements, like maybe at the Daughters of the American Revolution, American Legion, VFW, City Council, type things. I was doing those type of presentations, talking about the museum, and I started doing podcasts. So I did my first podcast back in March or April of 2022, and it was Combat Story with Ryan Fugit. And the angle for that whole setup was I reached out to Ryan, and I wanted him to do a podcast with my boss, Chris Cassidy. Chris has an amazing background with some of the things that he's done in his career. So I reached out, and then Ryan was like, hey, I'd love to hear your story because I've heard your name before. And I was like, okay, this would be a great time. I'll talk a little bit about my stuff, and then I'll be able to talk about the Medal of Honor, and all these listeners will be able to hear about it, and hopefully it'll help with fundraising and things like that. But did the episode with Ryan, and then when we stopped recording, he's like, dude, you got some amazing stories. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And that was the first time I'd heard it planted, it was the book thing. And kind of went back and forth with that. And it's like, hey, you got great lessons. The next generation needs to hear some of these things. It was like, okay, that was the first time I heard it. But as I continued to do podcasts, and I was trying to help promote the museum, but people always wanted to circle back to Green Beret stories. They always wanted to circle back to leadership and resilience, or Green Beret combat, in the streets of Baghdad. And then, of course, we'd stop recording, and then they would say the same thing. You got great stories. Have you ever thought about writing a book? Well, after the 10th or 15th podcast, someone finally said the same thing. Hey, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, I've heard that one before. Yes, I guess I have thought about it now because it's been brought up like 15 times. But dude, I wouldn't even know where to start. And this guy is the one that connected me with my co-author, Lauren Ungowdy, and said, hey, you should give her a call. She's written other books for other special ops guys. She's really talented. She's very bright. Maybe you should reach out to her. And as soon as I reached out to Lauren, I knew it was game over. Like, she was the person for me that was going to help me write my story. Because if you're going to write a book, you want it done right, and you want to have a great partnership. I knew I couldn't do it by myself. But that is the no kidding. That's the way it all started, was people telling me, hey, you should write a book. You should write a book. You got great stories. Don't you think the next generation should hear about some of these stories before, it's all lost and, people aren't talking about it anymore? So that's kind of where it all started.
That's awesome, man. You put this is your legacy in
Yes.
the earth, it's like, hey, you got to testify on how life has, how you've navigated through life, through this journey in the military, and all the obstacles you had to overcome. And it's going to be a very valuable tool for people who get to have the opportunity to read it and take it in. I saw some of the reviews on your book. I was like, holy cow, man, I started getting goosebumps. I got a little choked up. I said, man, this is great. So
Yeah.
It's great information, man. Okay, but here's a question I have for you. And this is a big one. You wrote the book, Grit to Glory, as more than just a memoir. It's a roadmap for resilience. But if someone only had the time to read one chapter, what would you tell them? Which one would you tell them to start with?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's very thought-provoking. You'd have to read the book to kind of know where I'm going to come from. I'm going to answer the question, but to really know the full context, you'd have to read the book. But if a person only had one chapter to read, I would suggest that they read the very last chapter. It's called the Grit Code, and it's my 8 principles basically for navigating through life, especially when life throws you a curveball or punches you in the face. But it's also if you want to level up. Say you're Mr. Successful, Mr. or Mrs. Successful, and you just want to level up and maybe get that next promotion or go to that next job title. The Grit Code chapter is the chapter for you, and it basically summarizes all those like punch in the face moments that I had to learn great life lessons. It puts them in that last chapter, the Grit Code. It summarizes everything, and it lays out the 8 principles. which is the Grit Code is basically a blueprint to help you navigate through life. That would be the chapter I would tell them to read.
Awesome, man. That's awesome. I thought you were going to say the time I was, I was in boot camp and I had to dig myself my own personal grave, 6 foot.
No.
No, okay. Let's see here. A last question, but I got something we got to do after that. For veterans listening to this right now, lost, struggling, feeling like their best years are behind them, what's the one thing you need them to hear?
Keep fighting. Stay in the fight. Keep moving forward. I like to say often that I am very much a work in progress. Like there's a lot that I still want to do, and I'm still working through. Fitness, nutrition come right off the top because I'm still working my way through that, and that's something I've been struggling with, for the last couple of years, especially with injuries and things like that. But be that work in progress. And I would tell you this too, it takes a lot of courage to raise your hand and say, I need some help. Please help me. That takes a lot of courage to do that. And if you think back to your time in the military, whatever you did, let's just take it back to combat. You're in the streets of Baghdad, and there's enemy everywhere. Like you would get on that radio and you'd be like, man, I need some help. Give me some drones, give me some tanks, whatever it might be. Like you wouldn't even think twice about doing that. You call, you want reinforcements, you want help. But all of a sudden you get out of the military and you think that you're all by yourself, and you don't have anyone to reach out to, or you don't think anybody would care. But I'm here to tell you, there's a lot of people that care. There's a lot of assets. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of capabilities. There's tons of nonprofits that are wanting to talk to you and try to help you or just listen to you. But it takes a lot of courage. Raise your hand and say, I need some help. And if you're that person that you need some help, reach out to someone, and please put the booze off to the side, because it's probably not going to help. Almost 100%, it's not going to help your cause or what you're going through. That's not the answer. Put the booze off to the side. Your life is valuable. It's worth living. Don't take medications that you don't have prescriptions to. Pills aren't the answer, but it takes courage to ask for some help, and don't suffer in silence. Please don't suffer in silence. Reach out. There's resources. Please.
That's awesome, man. Darrell, okay, before we wrap up, I give every one of my guests a moment to shout out somebody that you want to lift up. Like you say, hey, I want to lift up this person, or someone that in your personal life, in your professional life, I want to give this person some props or some kudos or just some encouragement.
Yeah, let's see. That's a good one. I'd love to give a shout out to my son and daughter. My son's getting ready to do something where he might be taking the next step in his journey and career in the military. So I'd love to wish him well with what he's going to be going through here pretty soon, taking a big step, and I'm super proud of him. I'd also, shout out my daughter. She's been married a little over a year now. She's doing great things. Her and her husband are in North Carolina, so I'm so proud of them and everything that they're up to. But recently, I gave a shout out to my neighbors from North Carolina, Steve and Denise Welliver. Going back to being a single father and struggling, I was so fortunate that I had neighbors that lived just a few houses down, and I was fortunate that my daughter was best friends with their daughter. So I got some extra parenting, mentorship and help from Steve and Denise Welliver. So I haven't forgot that. I'm very, very appreciative, and I'll give a quick shout out to all my teammates that made Grit to Glory possible. Can't forget them. So thank you.
Darrell, man, it's so great to have you on Unfinished Business, a podcast for veterans pursuing a new life mission. I have so much respect and admiration for you, man. I've heard you speak before. I love the vulnerability that you shared during your conversations about, saying, hey, I know I'm a work in progress. We're still pushing forward. We're moving. We're taking one step at a time, doing the next right move. And I'm so grateful for you to set some time aside to be on the podcast. This podcast is about advancing the cause of veterans that are pursuing new life, help them to find resources that they can have a new transition into civilian life in a healthy way. So I really appreciate you, man.
And thank you for all that you're doing, man. That's great.
Thank you, brother. All right, guys, that's it for Unfinished Business, a podcast for veterans pursuing new life missions. Guys, as I always say, have peace and enlighten you. Remember that the ocean refuses no river.
Unfinished business, I've got more to give. I'm not done yet, this life persists. This is my story, my unfinished business.